You need to understand that this way of playing is to have total disregard for the lives of your troops. They will be sent in wave after wave and must hold the enemy back rather than kill them until you score so many victory points that the enemy cannot compete or achieve victory before you run out of bodies. And run is the operative word in this detachment. If you have heard me talk about this before, this detachment does one other theme consistently: advance and charge. This army is mostly on foot but can go very fast. And the learning curve is not figuring out how to go fast, but when to go fast. If you run in and die, scoring nothing and killing nothing important to the great plan, you helped your enemy. You have to learn when to advance and charge and when to advance and do nothing else. Only outscore your opponent on the objective. Stand still. Contemplate life. Score victory points. So the playstyle is a tide of bodies crashing over and over into the enemy while we score victory points. Not so much about killing, but holding up and inconveniencing the enemy. Hug them into submission. What you don't get more of is additional strength, additional armor penetration, lethal hits or sustained hits. If you are going into a battle thinking that loads of metamorph attacks will carry you through and kill everything, you are unlikely to come out of that battle thinking that was a valid plan. There are a few ways to cause damage with our usual units and some enhancements and stratagems, but we have to think differently with this detachment. Move in front of the enemy just to block them. As your models die, surge move another unit in to keep holding the enemy back while you frantically score victory points and hope your extensive reserves last longer than the enemy's units that score them victory points. Because this detachment has a steep learning curve, if you want to see other ways to play the Genestealer cult if this isn't your style, as part of Genuary, I am looking into all the detachments to explore how best to play. If you click subscribe on YouTube, then you should see those videos. And if you want personal help where I make an army list for you and talk you through with it, that is an option on my Ko-fi, which is linked in the description. It accepts tip money, and if you're very happy with this video, please bear that in mind at the end. The detachment rule first. This is about getting rerolls to the advance and charge rolls, but it is easier to get those rerolls than you would think on your first reading. This detachment is about the battle line units, acolytes, neophytes, acolytes, and also the Metamorphs, not so much about the characters. Now the detachment rule is tied to the characters leading units, as long as those units are neophytes, acolytes, or Metamorphs. While one of those units is led by a character, and it is any character, you can reroll advance rolls, you can reroll charge rolls. A Biophagus with Aberrants won't get any bonus, but a Biophagus with Metamorphs will. As your characters die, the detachment loses its power, no more rerolls to charge. There is a stratagem that lets you reroll a charge, but you need to charge an enemy in combat with one of your character units. Do not try and charge from reserves just because you have rerolls. 9-inch charge with rerolls fails about half the time. And if you get a successful charge, maybe don't reroll it, even if that would get you more models into combat. Because if rerolling means failing the charge, well, I've played this detachment enough to have done that before. I needed a 4 and I got a 5, but that would leave half the unit not fighting even after piling. So I rerolled the charge and I got a 3. No charge. No chance to take the objective. I don't like it when that happens. You should like the video. The second part of the detachment rule is that the Magos, the Primus, and the Icon Ward have a 3+ feel no pain for that model while they're leading acolytes, metamorphs, or neophytes. So while the first part of the detachment rule is any character in those units, the second part gives you bonuses to those 3 characters. The 3+ feel no pain is there to stop precision from cutting out the character, giving the detachment rule. A feel no pain lasts until an enemy that is attacking you has finished their attack, so even if one enemy unit can cut through the bodyguard and then hit the character, those last few attacks allocated to the character may be stopped by the 3+ feel no pain. Abilities like this end once the enemy unit has finished their attacks. Another unit attacking in the same phase or later will not be stopped by the feel no pain because there are no bodyguard models left. but having a single model alive can force enemies to consolidate into your model and not consolidate onto a nearby objective. Or you get shot and one model stays alive for a bit longer and can hold that objective. If that model is not below half wounds, even though their entire bodyguard has died around them, then that Primus on 2 wounds doesn't have to take a battle shock test. They can then continue to complete secondary missions. The Primus, the Icon Ward and the Magos are important because these 3 are the only characters that can take enhancements in this detachment. So these are the characters you will include in equal number to the enhancements that you want. Other than that, follow what is normally good for the units. I like a Locust for my Acolytes with auto pistols and mining tools, a Biophagus for my Metamorphs, and an Abominant with Aberrants, but maybe not the big hammers in this detachment. Of the 3 characters that can have enhancements, the Icon Ward may be the most useful. They give Acolytes or Neophytes a Feel No Pain of 5+, not as necessary on 10 Acolytes, very useful on 20 Neophytes, and if they're with Metamorphs, they have Scout, so the unit can still Scout, and the Metamorphs 5+ Feel No Pain goes to a 4+ Feel No Pain. They also have a somewhat useful ability to move blip tokens that are taken off the board and put them near themselves. Usually they're going to get taken off in the enemy movement phase. That is when you can sort of rapid ingress from Cult Ambush onto one of these Cult Ambush markers. And that can be done almost right next to the Icon Ward. The Magos has an ability to make the enemy shooting -1 to hit, unless you roll a 1, but you don't need line of sight to the enemy unit you're targeting, and once per game the 12-inch range can be upped to a reasonable 18-inch range. And if you manage to roll a 6, the enemy is -1 to hit and -1 to their wound rolls. They also have the ability to remove battle shock from one of your units at the start of any phase, so if you need to deny the enemy some victory points by getting on an objective with a unit, you can un-battle shock your unit so it has objective control, or it can complete secondary missions because it now has objective control, and it's units that have objective control 0, like from being battle shocked, that cannot start an action. But they are the same points as an Icon Ward, and a 5-up Feel No Pain is usually overall just better. The Primus has 2 abilities, one that gives your unit +1 to hit. That is shooting or combat, so it's useful with Neophytes, it's useful with Acolytes or Metamorphs. But as you will see from the Enhancements and Stratagems, there are ways to get our combat units hitting on a 2+, even without this. The other ability is Decoys and Misdirection, so you can move 3 units around your deployment zone. If the units were infiltrating, you can move them around in the middle of the board, and you can put units into strategic reserves, even if you were going over the strategic reserves limit. If you see that your Metamorphs are right in front of the enemy's anti-infantry guns, you can move them somewhere else in the deployment zone. When you're thinking of which character to put the enhancements on, the Icon Ward is usually going to be the answer. But these are the abilities you get from taking these characters. You add the enhancement to them to make them even better. All of the enhancements can be used, all of them are useful, all of them are pretty fairly priced. Incendiary Inspiration is the first one, and that is one way to get Advance and Charge. This is useful on a Primus because they want to get into combat with their unit. It's also useful on an Icon Ward, and there is a tactic that will be mentioned several times in this video, where we put Metamorphs in a truck, and we're able to charge into the enemy deployment zone in turn 1. So you have a unit of 10 Metamorphs. They have Hand Flamers. They're attached to an Icon Ward. The Icon Ward has Incendiary Inspiration. The whole unit is in a Goliath truck. This is a dedicated transport. All models inside can scout, so the transport can scout 6 inches. If you go first, or even if you go second, you can disembark. That gives you 3 inches from the truck. And then you can advance with a reroll because of the detachment rule, and then you can charge with a reroll because of the detachment rule. And advance and charge is what Incendiary Inspiration does. You can charge a unit in the enemy deployment zone when you started the game in your deployment zone. You can do it with Metamorphs in the truck alone and no Icon Ward, but then you'll have to spend a command point on advance and charge with Tireless Fervor. And if you go first, you want to spend your command point on Transcendent Celerity to advance and be able to shoot those Hand Flamers. Then you can burn away Dominions or Gretchen that are being used to block your charge to the enemy you want to get into. And you get full rerolls to wound on those Hand Flamers if the Goliath truck shoots at the same enemy first and hits with any of its weapons. One way to guarantee that the truck will hit is to have another unit of Metamorphs scout behind, They can get into the truck before or after it is moved, and they can shoot up to 6 of their hand flamers from the firing deck. That counts as a weapon fired by the truck through the firing deck, and hand flamers auto hit. You don't have to do this. All clever tactics are things you can do, not that you should do. All parts of the datasheet are options. You have many buttons you can press. That does not mean you should press all of the buttons. If the enemy was going to play very cagey and wait for you to commit before countering, like they have lots of units that get bonuses against your units if you're an objective, you would be wasting this turn 1 if they're going to stay in their deployment zone anyway. And if you were going to charge a unit you can't hurt, don't bother. Taking out one flank of the enemy army is great, but don't get 200 to 300 points of your units killed in the first turn. And make sure you kill the enemy units that score victory points, or units that can do very bad things to our infantry hordes. Send in Pure Strange to support. They infiltrate, they have a high movement characteristic, and they can also advance and charge. Remember that we're going to win by outscoring and outlasting our opponents. Pin them in their deployment zone and give them a problem to deal with in the first turn. That can stop them in their normal turn 1 plan. It is okay for the Metamorphs to die doing a valuable service, and with an Icon Ward, the Metamorphs have a 4+ feel no pain, so usually they only die in the enemy turn. And we can bring them back with Resurgence points. And in this detachment, we have even more units return than normal. The second enhancement is Deeds that Speak to the Masses. You always want this enhancement now. In its pure Codex version, I found it was not worth the points for a reroll on one unit once per turn on a 4+, only if they're battle line, to see if they come back. Now, for 25 points, you get a 70-point unit worth of Resurgence points. It doesn't sound fair, but you'll only get that unit later in the game when you've lost units. You also have to factor in the cost of the character you enhance. 25 points, plus at least 50 points. So you want to get some additional value from the character. At the very least, a unit you join can reroll advance and charge rolls. And it doesn't matter if the character dies. Once the game starts, this enhancement has done its job. So start your list building with this enhancement and one of the 3 characters that can take it, then build out into a horde. I have affiliates in the description from which you can buy Genestealer Cult models cheaper than going through Games Workshop. I recommend them, and if you use those links, I get a little bit of money. That's another way to thank me for the valuable video, which also gives you something in return. More Genestealer cultists. Denunciator of Tyrants is the 3rd enhancement. It is a better and more expensive version of the Host of Ascension's Assassination Edict. Assassination Edict gives your unit +1 to hit if they're attacking an enemy character unit. Denunciator of Tyrants gives you +1 to hit and +1 to wound. There are lots of characters out there. Any attached unit has a character model. Big Imperial Knights are all characters. Now don't put this enhancement on a Primus. That is half of the enhancement already, as the Primus has +1 to hit built in. And you want it to be going on a unit that you know can strike a character. So rather than a combat unit that has to be placed opposite the right enemy and then get a charge, add it to an Icon Ward or a Magos leading neophytes that will deep strike in. Okay, it's going to be 20 neophytes, and it is an Icon Ward who makes the neophytes very difficult to kill because of a 5+ feel no pain on those 20 bodies. And now, all of those autoguns, seismic cannons, mining lasers, heavy stubbers if you really wanted, and the flamers, and the grenade launchers, they get +1 to hit and +1 to wound. That can be quite the damage dealer, but you're limited as to which units it can hurt. It's only character units. So it's not quite like the Host of Ascension, where you drop in 20 neophytes and they have the same bonuses regardless of what they're shooting at. Unless they had Assassination Edict. Then kind of the same rules apply. Lastly, we have a stick. The Genesire's Reliquant. The unit can reroll Battle Shock tests. It's not all leadership tests, just Battle Shock tests. I do not hate it for the princely sum of 5 points. If you had the spare points and a character that can use it, usually an Icon Ward, then you're going to forget that you had this. And I say Icon Ward because you don't need more than one Primus, as the decoys and misdirection ability to redeploy units only works once, and the Magos already has an ability to remove Battle Shock from a friendly unit, including its own unit. I've briefly mentioned 2 of the 6 stratagems, but let's go even deeper into the stratagems. This is of course where we will be advancing and charging, and doing many other things that get us into combat. I use 5 of the 6 stratagems, which is rare for a detachment. Normally, once you play a detachment enough, there are 2, sometimes 3 stratagems you use in a game, as you will see from other detachments in this series. But there are many useful stratagems here, and I will explain when and where you use them. Tireless Fervor is Advance and Charge. What? In this detachment? I, for one, am shocked. The stratagem is used in the charge phase, so you don't have to decide in the movement phase if you're going to use it on a unit. If you need a unit to charge an objective, if one of your planned charges failed, you can use this as a backup to get a different unit to charge. You could throw neophytes that advanced onto an objective. This is a really good stratagem because it does a lot more than that. You can fall back and charge. If the enemy charged you, they will fight before you, then you will fight. In your fight phase, because neither side is charged, neither side has fight first, your opponent will get to pick a unit to fight before you. Which means the unit that charged you will be fighting again, then if you have any models left, you would fight back. If instead you fall back and then charge back in, you now have fight first, you fight before them. This means the enemy charged and fought, then you fought back, then you get to fight again. It's like double striking. Or you can get out of a place where you're not fighting very well and get somewhere else. Acolytes with mining tools aren't going to have the number of attacks to get through lots of Imperial Guardsmen. But if they can fall back and charge a Chimera or a Leman Russ, then they can do a lot more damage with their anti-vehicle mining tools. Furthermore, you get to reroll the charge roll if you're charging into engagement range of an enemy that is in engagement range of a friendly character unit. So if those acolytes that fell back didn't have a character with them, so they're not rerolling their charge roll innately, if you charged in a Magos to that Leman Russ, there's now a Magos in engagement range. Now those acolytes get to re-roll the charge roll. It could also mean that a Primus has had his bodyguard killed around him, he's still in combat, and then the replacement for his bodyguard that came back through resurgence points charges back in with a re-roll to the charge.
Ralph, I thought you were dead. Nope.
This is a very versatile stratagem beyond Advance and Charge. But Advance and Charge. If we want to get into combat, in our opponent's turn, we have the Path of Anguish. This is a surge move. Metamorphs already have that, so this is a way of giving it to acolytes or neophytes. In your opponent's shooting phase, after they've shot and killed at least one of your acolyte or neophyte models, you can make a surge move of d6, but you must end as close as possible to the closest enemy unit, but you can go into engagement range. Acolytes usually die to shooting, and 2 or 3 of them in combat won't do so much. But a block of neophytes surging onto an objective can work. That gets you something more important than kills: victory points in your coming command phase. And surging into combat with a few losses can keep you safe from more attacks from other enemy units. They cannot shoot you if you are in engagement range of one of their units. With Transcendent Celerity, we don't just advance and charge in this detachment, we can advance and shoot. That is good for neophytes with lots of guns who want to get onto an objective and still be able to shoot, or it's good for any unit with hand flamers. Acolytes with hand flamers, Metamorphs with hand flamers. Go really far, get round the corner to see more of an enemy unit, you may be able to re-roll the advance roll if you have a character with you, and you can follow up the attack with Tireless Fervor to also charge. Assuming you have enough command points. One way to do that is to have a Nexus in the unit. The problem is, the Nexus doesn't like being in combat, so being rushed forwards, table and all, is not their style. You have a lot of stratagems you want to use, save your command points for combos like that. It's a lot of movement, as we saw with the Truck Scout Metamorph advance and shoot and charge tactic. We also have a lot of Acolytes in this detachment. Acolytes on an objective can generate additional command points, maximum of 1 per battle round. So we advance and shot, maybe we advance and charged. Once in combat, we have Frenzied Devotion. Acolytes, Metamorphs, or Neophytes get an extra attack and improve their weapon skill by 1. So Metamorphs and Acolytes are hitting on a 2+. And you have so many more attacks. That's more attacks for the damage 2 Metamorph profile, and it's an extra attack with the mining tools, now hitting on a 2+. They become very skilled at cutting apart vehicles. It's like a racing team, but they don't put it back together again. It doesn't apply to characters in the unit, but the bad part doesn't apply to characters either. The unit is hazardous. Usually that's not a problem. You roll a dice for every model that attacked, and if you roll a 1, they take 3 mortal wounds. We can regenerate the dead in your next command phase. It's either D3 models or 3 models for Acolytes and Metamorphs with their cult icon, or it's 3 models or D3 plus 3 models for Neophytes. Though the failed hazardous test causes 3 wounds to your model, it is possible to pass 3 feel no pain saves on like a Metamorph and live. And don't discount Neophytes as the target of this stratagem. Charge enemies on their stat level. Toughness 3 Cultists, Imperial Guard. You hit on a 3+, wound on a 4+, and you have 2 attacks per Neophyte. That can cause a lot of casualties. And the deaths from hazardous can be replaced with the cult icon in our next turn. And don't forget to fire your pistols in the shooting phase. All the Neophytes have pistols. There are far more uses for Neophytes than an advance and charge detachment would suggest. Vengeance for the Martyr can be very effective to help any of your units cause more damage. It can be very effective on a unit of 20 Neophytes. You have +1 to hit and wound, only against characters, and there are no lethal hits or sustained hits available unless you add a Benefictus. But the shooting is still very good, because now you can get full rerolls to hit. 20 Neophytes with an Icon Ward. That's probably the best place for an Icon Ward, other than the truck tactic. And that is how we can get an early Vengeance for the Martyr. If you have the command points for that, and Transcendent Celerity, assuming you died in your own first turn, and you went first. If you're going second, you will have 1 command point at the start of the enemy turn 1, and 1 from the start of your turn. Whatever unit killed the Icon Ward and those Metamorphs that got out of the truck in the enemy deployment zone, your Acolytes, Metamorphs, or Neophytes reroll hit rolls. You can use this on any character when they die, but then you only get to reroll hit rolls of 1. Like if an Abominant died, even if she came back, the Neophytes, Acolytes, and Metamorphs get to reroll hit rolls of 1 against that enemy that knocked her down. Unfortunately, you have to use this stratagem in the shooting phase or the fight phase, so if the enemy had an ability to fly over you and cause mortal wounds which killed your character, you can't use this stratagem. If they hit you with tank shock in the charge phase, you can't use this stratagem. Try and make sure you die against an enemy that really doesn't want to have full rerolls to hit against it. So that's enemy victory point scoring troops, or units that can kill your hordes. Shoot away loads of Gretchen that were going to complete missions and generate command points. Kill Orc boys in combat. If you can get your first Icon Ward to die against the toughest, most powerful enemy unit, this is where Vengeance for the Martyr truly shines. But it's only reroll hit rolls. If they're super tough and have loads of wounds, you're not getting health for the wound roll. You could have a lone Magus instead of a different lone operative, or a small unit of Acolytes or Neophytes that were going to complete missions. The lone Magus is a little bit cheaper. They can cast their -1 to hit on enemies in the shooting phase, which doesn't need line of sight. And when they die, the enemy unit that destroyed them can be made the target of Vengeance for the Martyr. But you'll die pretty easily. You don't get the 3+ feel no pain unless you're leading a unit. The last stratagem is Downtrodden Rise, the one I don't use. This has been reworked to be usable in September 2025, a year after the Codex came out. It used to let you bring back a unit for 2 command points if you lost all your Cult Ambush markers. In the Codex, these were everything. They were the only way to get your units back. No deep striking from Cult Ambush. But once Cult Ambush changed so you could arrive from deep strike, it became a pointless stratagem. In its new form, it is still 2 command points. It lets you do a 6-inch rapid ingress, sort of, from Cult Ambush, and you don't need a Cult Ambush marker to be there. I have done it with Metamorphs. It is after the enemy movement phase is done, and I drop them near an enemy on an objective, so that if the Metamorphs get shot, they surge move onto the objective. If we get charged, Overwatch with Handflamers. If you have Handflamers, and then it's another command point to do that. 3 command points in short order. Neither are good options for your opponent if you have chosen the right enemy unit, like Battle Sisters, Imperial Guard squads, most Tau units. If the Metamorphs are then left alone, we can move and shoot and charge as we like in the coming turn, knowing we can take that objective right away. But there are a lot of ifs. Another option, probably better option, is to drop 20 Neophytes that were destroyed, that is 6 Resurgence points to get the unit back, but by putting 20 Neophytes in front of the enemy army, 6 inches away, you can block multiple charges that were going to go against your equally squishy Acolytes or Metamorphs. If you get shot, and you have a 3rd command point, Path of Anguish, to get into the enemy, because as soon as you're in combat with one enemy unit, unless they're a tank using big guns never tire, You can't be shot anymore. In combat, you'll take casualties, but have the survivors stay in base contact with the enemy to stop them consolidating onwards. Enemies have to move closer to your models instead of objectives. And our unit coherency is only checked at the end of the turn. We want to hold up the enemy for a whole turn. And removing the models that were in engagement range with the enemy will mean that we start our next turn out of engagement range. It's a very sneaky shenanigan. But because the unit this is used on has to be in cult ambush, meaning they have to have already been on the table and died, the timing to get the most out of this is difficult because it relies on the enemy killing your 20 neophytes, you spending 6 resurgence points to get them back, having 2 command points, and the enemy not already embroiled in a lot of fights. But it is funny to surround your enemy in neophytes in a circle of shame. But this is a tactic that works better in the Host of Ascension, where you can arrive in your movement phase from reserves and block enemy movement in their coming turn and any charges that would go past us. We are now going to look at some army lists and then finish with more tactics that you can use in this detachment. There is a 1000 point army list and a 2000 point army list. If you wanted to play 1200 points, take the 1000 point list and then add to it. If you wanted a 1500 point list, you could cut down the 2000 point list or add to the 1000 point list, or use either of them as inspirations along with anything else that you've learned in this video. At 1000 points, the Xenocreed Congregation has an advantage. In the 2025-2026 mission deck, battle line units are eligible to advance and still complete an action. Also, shooting does not mean you're not eligible to do an action. So with Transcendent Celerity, you can advance and shoot, and because advancing and because shooting does not stop an action for battle line units, your acolytes with hand flamers can still complete a mission. We have a lot of battle line units. They're the good units in this detachment. The army list for 1000 points has an icon ward with Denunciator of Tyrants. They will lead 20 neophytes. There's an icon ward with Incendiary Inspiration and 10 Metamorphs, and we also happen to have a Goliath truck. Do you see the tactic coming back? It is an optional tactic, but it's there. There's a Magos with Deeds that Speak to the Masses. We want more resurgence points. 10 Acolytes with Auto Pistols and Mining Tools, an Achilles Ridge Runner, 5 Pure Strain Genestealers, 10 Neophytes, and a Sanctus. Now, the Icon Ward and the 20 Neophytes. They will want 2 Grenade Launchers, 2 Flamers, 2 Seismic Cannons, probably 2 Mining Lasers. They will Deep Strike, they will shoot an enemy character unit block, and in turn, be a very difficult unit to shift. That is their job. Kill a thing, take an objective, maybe spread out onto 2 objectives if you can keep the enemy far enough back, keep scoring victory points, and if you do get knocked off one of the objectives, you have a planned generations in the making so that it remains yours until the enemy gets models onto it and takes it from you. I have a Magos leading 10 Acolytes. I don't find that an Icon Ward gives you too much defense in terms of a 5+ Feel No Pain. You know how much longer Metamorphs last than Acolytes. It is not a noticeable amount of time. But the Magos' -1 to hit on a chosen enemy in range can be very effective on something like Orc Shooting or Imperial Guard platoons. And, as a character, the unit gets to reroll advance rolls and charge rolls. This is a good unit to use Rapid Ingress on. As a Magos, they can take enhancements, in this case, Deeds That Speak. Even though it's 1000 points, we still get 2 extra resurgence points. That is a quarter extra points. That can do a lot to swing games at 1000 points. And I think at 1000 points, this detachment is one of my favourites to play with the Genestealer Cult. Our Incendiary Inspiration Icon Ward with his 10 Metamorphs will go in the truck. The Metamorphs have all hand flamers, no cult icon. This is a one-way trip. They won't survive until the next Genestealer Cult turn to recover models, even with a 4+ Feel No Pain. It has happened occasionally that the Metamorphs take the enemy home objective and another unit moves in to take it back and shoot them, but we can Brood Surge into combat. Opponents will rarely risk that. And with hand flamers, the Metamorph surge is only a random d6 inches. But at 1000 points, the enemy army may only be 6 units. If you can kill one in the first turn, ideally one that has objective secured, like Intercessors, like Battle Sisters, then the enemy can only have 1 unit per objective, As soon as you kill another, that's reducing the amount of objectives they could possibly take. Whereas our Metamorphs will come back with resurgence points to do it again and hopefully kill another unit. The truck can support the shooting of the Metamorph Handflamers if it can get line of sight on something. Otherwise, units like the 10 Neophytes can get into the truck and be safer for a bit longer. Those 10 Neophytes use a plan generations in the making to do objective secured, sticky objectives on our home objective. It's ours until the enemy takes it from us. They want to complete secondary missions. Or if the enemy has deep striking units to come on, you can spread them out and screen out to stop those enemies deep striking so close to objectives. The Ridge Runner has a mortar. This means it can hit whatever the Metamorphs turn 1 shoot and charge at. Usually the screening unit to make sure they are dead. If there is a screening unit. Ridge Runner shoots first, then the truck shoots, then the Metamorphs shoot. And that should get rid of the enemy blocking the charge, even if it was a big unit like 20 Chaos Cultists. Or if you find that your list struggles against lots of enemy vehicles, like it's a rush of rhinos, a heavy mining laser instead that has a spotter, so you hit on a 3+ with Blister Skill 3+, that's what the spotter does. That's a good general tool to strike at vehicles and heavy infantry. Because although we have acolytes with mining tools, they might not make it through an enemy overwatch. The 5 Pure Strain Genestealers can spread out to stop enemy infiltrators. Enemies cannot deploy within 9 inches of you. It depends who goes first. But wherever they deploy, that gives you an unbroken corridor if I did want the truck to zoom into the enemy deployment zone turn 1. Remember, this is optional. The army doesn't rely on the Metamorphs in the truck doing this one charge. The tactic just takes some explanation. Don't mistake the amount of time I have talked about it as an indication of importance. The truck could be a good counter-attacking unit. Metamorphs get out and kill a unit on an objective, while the truck starts an action on the objective. That is also valid. The Sanctus is there to infiltrate. They can hold an objective from the start. They can't be shot outside of 12 inches because they have lone operative. Equip them with a knife, so that with their fancy cloak they cannot be shot by Overwatch. You could instead have a Magos who wanders alone, like an Aesop Fable character, but they can't infiltrate, they don't have lone operative, and throwing them into combat to get them killed, where enemies cannot choose not to attack the way they can choose not to shoot, just to trigger vengeance for the martyr, it's more of a hypothetical than a good use. Another alternative is to have no Denunciator of Tyrants, and swap a Sanctus for more infiltrating and advancing and charging Pure Strains. One unit can follow and support the unit in the truck, the other can focus on primary and secondary missions in the early turns. Then the units that we bring back with our boosted 8 Resurgence points are the 10 Metamorphs and 2 lots of 5 Pure Strains, though that could be the same unit of 5 Pure Strains over and over. Despite their relationship with the Patriarch, the Pure Strains are disposable, more disposable than other units, just because of the amount of Resurgence points they cost. Or it could be 10 Acolytes and 10 Metamorphs, but if I can bring back 3 units instead of 2, that would be great. The 2000 point list pretty much takes this as a base and then expands on it. So a 2000 point list has an Icon Ward with Denunciator of Tyrants with 20 Neophytes, an Icon Ward with Incendiary Inspiration, 10 Metamorphs and a Goliath truck, a Primus with Deeds that Speak to the Masses, 10 Acolytes with Auto Pistols, a Biophagus, 10 Acolytes with Auto Pistols, a Locus, 10 Metamorphs, a Reductus Saboteur instead of a Sanctus, 3 Achilles Ridge Runners, all in separate units, 3 separate units of 5 Acolytes with Auto Pistols and Mining Tools, 1 unit of Acolytes with Hand Flamers, a squad of 5 Metamorphs, 2 squads of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers, and a squad of 10 Neophytes. The Neophytes are on the home objective, that's where they start, they can sticky that, and then they can move on to another objective. The 20 Neophytes with the Icon Ward and the Denunciator of Tyrants starts the game in reserves, ready to deep strike and shoot an enemy character unit. And the Icon Ward with Incendiary Inspiration in the truck with the Metamorphs is there to strike in the first turn if we want. Spend 4 of your 10, 12 Resurgence points to get them back after they die. And you could return by Cult Ambush in the enemy turn 1 if it went badly and they all died in our turn 1 after going first. That's a unit that's immediately ready to charge on turn 2. There's a Primus, they can join Acolytes or they could join Metamorphs. These are units that could already have Weapon Skill 2+ and be hitting on a 2+, but whichever unit the Primus joins is one unit that doesn't necessarily need Frenzied Devotion. And we have deeds that speak to the masses, we have our 2 more resurgence points. And with the ability to redeploy, we can move around our acolytes so that they're facing enemy tanks, and the Metamorphs are facing off against enemy infantry. The Reductor Saboteur wants to infiltrate, and ideally out of line of sight, but quite close to the enemy. With 24-inch indirect fire bombs, you can hit the enemy screening units or enemies on their home objective and start chipping away at them until they're dead. This doesn't work against Necron warriors that regenerate. In that case, you would soften up some flayed ones that Pure Strain Genestealers are going to charge. And as the Reductus is there turn 1, you could instead complete an action. The ideal situation is near to an objective, but out of line of sight. Enemies then step on the objective and set off her planted explosive. If she isn't killed in the enemy turn, you can move out and use grenades for free, and her demo charge, which hits on a 3+. 5 Pure Strain Genestealers could protect her. Infiltrate near her, do actions in the first turn. Or they can be another unit to advance and charge from the middle of the board to support the Metamorphs. You could have one of the Pure Strain units do each task. Going with the truck, you can strike or you can block enemy movement on turn 1. Stop them leaving their deployment zone on one flank. If you can line up in front of a ruin, the enemy can't move through the ruin to get to you, so they'll have to go around. That slows them down. That stops them getting to objectives in the first turn. Maybe even the second turn. Depends on the secondary missions you draw, it depends on the primary missions, or if the mission is like a crusade mission or a bunker mission and you have additional actions to do in the middle of the board, you have units there that could do it. There's 3 infiltrating units. There are often 3 objectives in the middle of the board. 2 Pure Strain Genestealers for 2 objectives, 1 objective for the Reductus Saboteur. They're soon going to get support. There are 5 acolytes with auto pistols and mining tools that start and stay on the home objective. They can start generating command points from like turn 1 or maybe turn 2. It depends if you go second or you go first. We want characters in this army, so we have a Biophagus with acolytes or joining Metamorphs. Just having any character lets you reroll your advance rolls, but importantly lets you reroll your charge rolls. So any unit of 10 combat acolytes or Metamorphs wants a character. Assuming it's acolytes with the Biophagus, they can tackle tanks, you have lethal hits, you have anti-vehicle 4+ on the mining tools, or they can fight heavy infantry. Strength 5 on the mining tools, you can also have once per game +1 to wound with the Alchemicus Familiar, and you have lethal hits. They're maybe not amazing, but often they do well enough. The Locus is with 10 Metamorphs, but they could be switched around with the Biophagus or the Primus. It's up to you where you want the characters. And you only have to decide that after seeing the enemy army. If your Strength 5 mining tools are not going to struggle to hurt the enemy, put the Biophagus with the Metamorphs. Have the Locust with acolytes so that they can fight first if they're charged, have the Primus with other acolytes so at least they get +1 to hit. The 3 Ridge Runners are all separate. You're allowed 3 of a data sheet at 2,000 points. One of them has a mortar and a spotter for the crossfire bonus anywhere. The spotter is to give you a higher ballistic skill so you're more likely to hit when you have -1 to hit from indirect fire. You could have a Survey Auger instead, so that if you're shooting at an enemy, the enemy cannot have the benefit of cover, but remember that hand flamers ignore cover anyway. The other 2 Ridge Runners have the big mining laser and a spotter so that they hit on a 3+, and that can help against vehicles and monsters, both by firing the big laser and also with crossfire for anything else attacking. As separate units, that is 3 enemy units that can be affected by crossfire to boost the armor penetration of neophytes. Hand flamers and AP1 claws become AP2 claws. Remember that the twin stubbers can give crossfire and shoot at something different to the mining laser. And then we have a lot of units of 5. Lots of 5 acolytes and Metamorphs, different kinds of acolytes. When the acolytes with mining tools go on to no man's land objectives, that is more chance to generate that 1 command point per battle round. We have stratagems we want to use, so get that command point. And with our plethora of resurgence points, we can bring back the units that the enemy fears the most. If they have an army of all vehicles, bring back more acolytes with mining tools. If they have lots of light infantry, lots of Imperial Guardsmen, lots of cultists, bring back Metamorphs with hand flamers or acolytes with hand flamers. Use the flamers to kill the last few models in enemy units, 1 less unit that can score points. Or kill small units that hold objectives, 10 Cadians, 4 Sisters of Silence. Handflamer acolytes kill them and then use their objective control 10 to take objectives. They'll die, but their 75 points can come back for 2 resurgence points and can kill more than their own value because their handflamers and their claws get to reroll wound rolls against enemies on objectives. Those AP -1 claws, or with a Ridge Runner, AP -2, rerolling the wound roll. That's loads of units to do missions and throw at the enemy, not caring about rerolls to charge. More often I will return lots of small units over big units, because then we have units in the late game to keep scoring primary and secondary missions while our opponent tries to whack-a-mole. But there's always more cultists. Okay, I'm hoping you've got a grasp of the army lists and many of the tactics that we use in this detachment. You want to take a lot of units that have high objective control in this army. Neophytes and acolytes, control objectives. To that end, kill the enemy units that also have high objective control, and they're units that can cut through 20 neophytes. That is why the truck charges turn 1. Those are the units they kill. Ignore the super expensive mega death cannon that the enemy has. If it is 4 strength 20 shots, that can kill 4 acolytes. We will get 3 back with the cult icon. Don't spend your time and soldiers trying to damage that big cannon. And the units you kill may not seem like a good exchange. 10 Metamorphs for 10 Necron warriors or some Orc boys and Gretchen, that doesn't sound great. But that forces the enemy to commit other units to holding objectives later in the game, and we spend resurgence points to bring the Metamorphs back. If this was chess, we would be trading pawns, but then we also get an extra regenerating pawn. It's not quite the same game. Thinking of it in trading pieces and chess terms doesn't work with the Genestealer cult. And while we're distracting the enemy in their own deployment zone, not only with a truck full of Metamorphs, but also deep striking acolytes with handflamers, with pure strain Genestealers that can return to the battle, you take control of the rest of the board. You are a horde, you have the bodies. Repeated speed bumps of 5 acolytes will slow the enemy down. Take objectives with small unit of acolytes and Metamorphs. Take up space so that the enemy deep striking units can't land, but you have the space to land 20 neophytes and destroy an enemy character unit, as you have +1 to hit and wound against them, and an extra AP. Maybe ignore cover as well if you have a survey augur instead of a spotter on one of the Ridge Runners. That is some damage. Keep chipping away. You don't have the raw killing power that the Host of Ascension, Final Day, or Biosanctic Brute Surge have. So what you can't kill, you need to plan that you're going to outscore and keep them tied up in combat. Again, neophytes are very useful for this. We can advance and charge. That doesn't mean you have to. Once you get past the advance and charge impulse and realize that this detachment throws bodies at the enemy until their arms are so weak and tired from killing that they have to go away and have a rest. That's how we win. That is why the neophytes work. You can use icon wards to save cult ambush markers that were removed and have units return near to the icon ward. Heroic intervention is now an option. That can get your unit straight back into the fight. Or you have a replacement unit right there that in the coming turn can move and charge, re-rolling that charge with Tireless Fervor if they go in to charge an enemy attacking the icon ward. The pure strains also like cult ambush markers. Their innate advance and charge and high movement lets them move into positions to score upcoming missions or charge exposed units. As the game continues and more of your units die, then you will see how much you have to focus on standing on objectives while another unit dies to stop the enemy getting to that objective. Your characters will die. Once that first turn charge Metamorph unit loses their icon ward, you no longer have advance and charge from Incendiary Inspiration. You're no longer rerolling advance rolls or rerolling charge rolls. You then have bodies and hope that what you achieved in the first 2 turns of killing the enemy's scoring units and scoring victory points where they couldn't will carry you through to the end of the game. That is how you play the Xenocreed Congregation. January will continue with another deep dive into another Genestealer Cult detachment. Until then, advance and charge to victory, and have a great day of 40k.